you can't help but wonder what's next for Nike.
They do have some competitive challenges out there they have to address. Innovation has to be at the top of their list. Improving their supply chain situation has to be at the top of the list. So they do have big challenges.
I'm Matt Tice, joining us today from Sydney. Good morning, Rondo. How are you today?
Good morning. I'm Rondo Moses joining from New York City.
All right. Well, we've got a great episode ahead of us today. We're going to be talking a little bit about Nike and their journey of how they ebb and flow in and out of the insurgent mindset. And I think it'll be really interesting to take one company and look at how, at different periods, it can occupy that deep incumbent sort of flavor versus the, really aggressive, assertive, innovative insurgent flavor. So why are we picking Nike, Rondo? What spurred us on to get this on the topic for today?
Yeah, I know you and I have talked about Nike for a while, but I had an opportunity to present to a group of leaders several weeks ago in Baltimore about the whole strategy, design, and execution in the age of disruption. And as you know, one of the areas I talk about to kick it off is this whole idea of having the right mindset for leaders that the right mindset that leaders need to thrive in an ever-evolving environment. So I talked about the whole incumbent and insurgent dynamic and mindsets and behaviors. And one of the participants sent me an email as a follow-up to that session, thanking me for my presentation and saying that the concept of insurgents and incumbents really left him, thinking a lot about how that would apply. And he started to think about Nike. And he said that he went home and he rewatched the movie, the Amazon movie Air, that talks basically about Michael Jordan and how Air Jordan came about. And he outlined some of the really good insights he pulled from the movie of behaviors that demonstrated how Nike was insurgent in some of the things that it did around that whole acquisition of Michael Jordan to the Nike brand. And it just made me think about, wow, yes, of course. I mean, again, we use Nike a lot, but to sort of get at it at that level of detail in terms of some of those specific behaviors that Nike exhibited during that period was really interesting. And he made me rewatch the movie. And when you look at it through that lens, there's so much that you miss when you're just sort of enjoying the movie versus analyzing it through this lens of insurgent versus incumbent and understanding how, when I looked at the movie, knowing that Nike's roots were basically in running shoes, they were in a basketball part of the business was flailing and basically nothing, and how they were able to save it by bringing on Michael Jordan. Nike had 17% of market share. Adidas had, I think it was like 53%, and no, Converse had 53. No, Adidas had 53%, and Converse had like 29%. And so for them to find a way to make this bet that no one would have expected them to make and really revolutionize the sneaker industry was really phenomenal.
I think the interesting thing about that particular story is, sort of Knight looking back on the experience of what really gave energy to Nike in their rediscovery, if you will, of the insurgent mindset, going after taking a big risk, going after really a marketing strategy that had never been really attempted. And ultimately, obviously, the results were fantastic. One of the greatest apparel franchises of all time, for sure. But it was that moment, I think, in the movie that really caught me where, you know, he kind of recognized that he was having fun, and it
Mm,
was, it was like supercharged, and they were taking these risks and looking back on it, how they felt like they drifted from that sort of DNA that was a big part of their early years. I thought that
right.
was a really great moment in the film where, he was able to kind of just sum it up all into this moment where he, really articulated kind of very crisp view of what the insurgent mindset means to him in that
Hmm.
moment, which I thought was great. And the thing for insurgents and how we think about the world and the lens that you mentioned is how do you put that in a bottle and then make it part of the culture and make it part of the way an organization operates all the time. So I think it'd
Right.
be interesting to kind of look at different phases of Nike's evolution because as I sort of read up again for this podcast to think a little bit more about how Nike's ebbed and flowed over these years, you can see these periods of really dynamic innovation where Nike's done some really groundbreaking stuff. And then you can see where Nike's fallen into the pattern of extrapolation. So find the next Michael Jordan, keep pushing on the things that worked before, invest hundreds of millions of dollars in the World Cup. Really interesting news recently with obviously Nike kind of stealing the sponsorship deal from Adidas. Very political and so forth in Germany with Adidas kind of a bit on the back foot, but we can come back to that a little bit later. But let's explore a little bit some of these phases of Nike. So, as the period of the movie Air sort of came to an end, what's the pivot from there? You've got Michael Jordan, you started to create this new franchise, you got a lot of energy. I think some of those original shoes are selling for tens of thousands of dollars now,
Hmm.
but
Hmm.
Michael Jordan is in his later years now, and you can't help but wonder what's next for Nike.
Yeah, well, the data shows that they're having some incumbent challenges now. I mean, I just read that, their first quarter results were, revenue was down, I think a little under 11%, 10.5% or something like that. They have basically lost market value, something like $28 billion in market cap was lost by the company during the tenure of the last CEO. A new CEO just took the reins in October. So they recognize that they are experiencing some significant competitive challenges from, more insurgent challenges like Hoka and On Running.
Yep.
Um, Adidas is also innovating a little faster than Nike. Another misstep that they had apparently was under the previous CEO. They sort of leaned
Donahoe.
Yes, Donovan. They leaned into the digital space, direct to consumer, at the expense of their relationships with the wholesalers. So
Yep.
they damaged a lot of that relationship. And then after the pandemic, their digital sales declined like 50%. So I think Elliott has been brought in, someone who was retired from Nike in 2021, 2022, to sort of reignite some of those old relationships that were bruised and sort of give more confidence inside the organization that to some extent, and I worry about this, that it's, business as usual, because not only did Donahue, shift to more of a digital strategy, he also tried to change the culture, from one that was more hierarchical, where decision making was centralized, to where he was trying to flatten the organization and bring more of a tech-oriented culture in. It didn't work within the
Mm.
context of Nike. So, but bringing back Elliott with that same sort of someone, I would imagine that old mindset. I don't know. The jury's going to be out on whether he will be successful, but the street seems to like him. He's made a number of leadership changes in only the month and a half that he's been on board. He's been trying to mend some of the relationships with the wholesalers that were frayed over the last couple of years. So we'll see, but they do have some competitive challenges out there they have to address. Innovation has to be at the top of their list. Improving their supply chain situation has to be at the top of the list. So they do have big challenges.
And as you point out, that channel balance is really important. This sort of what really started out for Nike as creating these innovation hubs, which were these flagship stores in key markets to get people to be able to experience the Nike edge, to
Hmm.
really engage with not only the brand, but the product and their peers and things and some technology as well, really brilliant. But what Nike seemed to have done was okay, we've got these stores, we're generating volume through these stores. Now let's really shift the channel dynamic much more to direct. And obviously, to your point, is alienated, a huge, well, all their channel partners around the world is kind of largely alienated these guys and opened up distribution for their competitors, kind of almost an own goal, if you will. And in
Right.
some ways, I think the other thing that strikes me a little bit about the Nike experience is it feels, in some ways, like we featured Boeing a little while ago, and
Mm.
feels similar to Boeing in terms of, during the Donahoe years, Nike seemed to take its eye off the ball of really product innovation. They kind of pulled back on that, hadn't been
Hmm.
really innovating. And like to your point, On and Hoka and others who have, kind of really filled that niche in terms of, particularly in the running category. The other thing it seems to me is that um, Nike kind of got lost a little bit in the fashion wars in a sense that Nike almost could be seen not so much as a running shoe business, but had sort of graduated into this world of, kind of sports fashion. And
Hmm. Hmm.
well, Adidas, very similar in terms of how they engage as well. Two of the very few in the category that have been successful at some level and kind of transcending the boundaries of fashion and sport. But whether that's really been a smart move for them, I don't know. It seems to me like they've extrapolated too far. And obviously the results show their market share has kind of come off the boil, sort of peaked maybe in 2020 at around 40, 45, 42, 43%.
Yeah.
And then the share price has been down. But here we are now into the Elliott Hill years where you're right. He's an insider.
An
This is
insider.
a guy that's deep, 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 deep Nike who goes almost all the way back to the beginning.
30
And
plus years.
whilst I'm sure that feels reassuring for Wall Street, one has to wonder whether that kind of innovation is going to come from an insider. But at the same time, I think, the jury's always out on whether the insider is going to be the guy. I think culturally that makes a lot of sense to, on some dimensions, get back to the core distribution, supply chain. But Nike is an innovation powerhouse. Let's not make any
Right.
mistakes,
Right.
right? I mean, if we go back, sort of my first experience really starting to see what Nike's doing goes way back to Nike ID and Nike Plus, which to me were just really transformative in terms of how Nike engaged with customers. Um, who would have ever thought that a company like Nike in the early years of the internet would be able to scale, design your own shoe for its customers. That's
Right.
just something that was really quite innovative and different, that sort of mass personalization, almost, applying the Dell model almost into sneakers, which, was something really fresh and new. And then I think the most exciting thing during those early years, the Mark Parker years, which I think, right now we can look back and say those were in the post-Phil Knight period, the most successful years, right? But they had this fellow called Stefan Olander, who is basically a tech guy, come in and reimagine the Nike customer experience in terms of,
Right.
is Nike a running shoe company, or is, Nike really about the runner? And I think that inversion was really powerful. And
Yeah.
that gave birth to Nike Plus, which was, if you remember, Rondo, the the sort of partnership with Apple where Nike created the first really telemetric sort of device in a running shoe, which then integrated with the iPod and created a lot of excitement. And they wrapped sort of there's almost in the pre-app, but then it sort of evolved in the app period. They wrapped this whole experience together to create something really different. And that
Right.
period led to about a 10% swing in market share for Nike. Really, just a massive amount of innovation.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because, building on what you're saying, it's like Nike was focused at that point on how runners engaged, with the sport of running, right?
Hmm.
The shoe became like was like the icing on the cake, but they were engaging at that customer level. Similar, with the Nike ID, really helping to personalize the shoe for the customer. So they were being customer proximate and helping customers to co-create the solutions that made the most sense for them. What do you think happened? Like, how did they move away from that focus on the customer to where they sort of started to just focus much more internally on getting out their product as opposed to worrying about what the customer really wanted? How did they
Hmm.
get off track?
Well, first, I'm not sure they completely got off track. So some of that period, um, some of the changes that sort of kind of went from Nike Plus through, I think eventually landed in Nike Fuel Band and
Too
then
bad.
finally
Uh-huh.
integrated into the app, right? Some of it was just the acceleration of technology and, kind of the where that to your point, they sort of had started to imagine the shoe and a little bit later on the the Nike store and also similarly upstream in the supply chain. We could talk about that in a minute, but they started to imagine Nike, I think, a little bit more as a platform than a shoe. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
The shoe as
Hmm.
a platform and the store as a platform to engage customers or
Right.
engage the runner, for example. But meanwhile, they're doing all the same things with that they had historically done, signing up these athletes and bidding $100 million for World Cups and things like that. So they're kind of operating in this parallel universe. And I think to Donahoe's credit, he did pick up the baton from, from the previous generation and some of the work that Stefan Olander and his team did to try to create this digital omni experience for customers
Hmm.
and put a lot of investment in that. But, sort of the marginal return on that investment seemed to be quite low to the point that I raised a minute ago. It's very difficult to get that next unit of market share at 43%. It's sort of that 44 comes really hard. And then
Right.
45 again comes really hard. So making all these investments, not necessarily seeing the return, but even, for example, in AI, Nike's put a lot of interesting investment in AI to think about how to connect these sort of the consumer, the emerging technology around AI with the product platform to create these new experiences, which is super innovative, but hasn't turned the dial because at the same time, Nike seems to have taken its eye off the ball on what we would describe as sort of the traditional y-axis sort of product
Hmm.
channel, some of the
Hmm.
core strategy stuff, which some of those things feel like big mistakes because the market has really shifted and consumer preferences are looking for something fresh, looking for something new. We talked about the channel. We talked about their slowdown in product innovation, probably at the expense of some of the tech innovation. And all that
Hmm.
has sort of converged to create a situation where Nike is underperformed.
Right. Yeah. I think you hit it. I think it's the tech innovation came at the expense of some much needed product innovation. And that's where the competitors were able to step in and find these niche markets where they could win on and beat Nike. And I think it sort of takes me back to, the movie Air. And I think what made Nike's offer so attractive to the Jordan family was the fact that Nike was going to, for the first time, create a sneaker around Michael Jordan. It wasn't that
Hmm.
this is the sneaker and you will be on the Nike label. It's sort of like we're creating this shoe and it's going to be the Air Jordan. It's the first of its kind, right? This and
Hmm.
so that really created a cultural phenomenon because now it became more than just performance. It was about, the personality of the person that comes through in the shoe. And I think Nike, probably lost some of that. I mean, with the whole Nike Plus, that they're focused on trying to engage how runners actually use the shoe and engage with running. That was important. But how can they get that kind of thinking back? Because I think that that's what was most successful. How do you really take the focus back to what does the market want and how do we deliver that in a way that's meaningful to them, because that's what I think the competitors are doing,
Mm.
you know.
Well, that's right. And now we, I think, come into an interesting period where, you've just summarized very nicely, I think, the Elliott Hill challenge, right? So how do I achieve all these things, and how do I satisfy, my loyal customers on one hand, but also Wall Street on the other hand, and sort of find that balance, accelerate product development, rebalance the channel, all this stuff that we talked about, right? So
Yeah,
I think
it's
that's
the
all.
same thing that happened with the whole futsal initiative, right?
Well, that's right.
They found a niche that was not being addressed, an untapped potential, and they saw an opportunity and they went after it and really designed shoes and other accessories around that whole niche market.
Right. And that sort of also, I think, was fascinating to see how their insurgent marketing played a role. Where, for example, 2010 World Cup, where, they were in a bidding war with Adidas over sponsorship rights. And they decided to go in a completely different direction, create a global futsal tournament, and, create a lot of excitement, really in the middle, early days of social media, creating this bottom up, ground up kind of guerrilla marketing tactic
Mhm.
that created a huge amount of energy around the brand and around the event, which largely came at the expense of Adidas. And I just think Nike feels like they've lost some of that DNA in terms of these, kind of really, really outrageous, different thinking
Yeah.
to kind of bring these new opportunities to market and exploit these niche. But here we are in a situation where, you know, uh, you talked a moment ago about competition. So we have these emerging challengers. Hoka's been around for a long time, but we have got On, and I even think Stefan Olander's created a separate business to challenge Nike in his post Nike years. And so these challengers are coming in, and they're offering something that feels at once very fresh from a fashion point of view, but also very, very aligned to the needs of the runner, right?
Hmm.
Just at the
Hmm.
core product level, and they're getting distribution. In the meantime, you've got Adidas, who we could kind of argue has kind of come off the boil. They had a real miss with this whole thing with Ye, formerly Kanye West, where that's created a lot of brand damage. They just lost the sponsorship of the German national team to Nike, right? So Nike's doing a pretty good job, I think, at kicking Adidas while they're down, but seems to be unprotected on the flank where some of these emergent rivals are really getting distribution pretty quickly at
Hmm.
the expense of Nike. Obviously, they're not going to get distribution in Nike stores, so getting distribution in the mall or in the sporting goods shop it's already the story is written. Nike's going to have to battle really hard to displace these insurgents from the channel, I think.
Yeah. But I do believe though that this whole cultural connection has to be a big part of the way forward for them. I think they have to find that, the next hot thing, like they did with the Jordan, like Adidas did with Kanye West Yee, as they call him here in the United States, because it was successful for a while. Because
Hmm.
I think the reason Nike appeals to so many young people, and that's what's made it culturally relevant, is they were able to tap into something that was happening on the ground. And that was in the case of Yee, that was him and his shoe and his fashion sense. But in Jordan, it was how he just revolutionized the whole game of basketball for so many people. He made so many people tune in. I sort of think of it like women's basketball here now, is so much more entertaining, and some people are tuning in because of some of the talent, right? So they're not just great basketball players, but they're also entertaining to watch. And I think that Nike needs to find where's the next source of that sort of entertainment, inspiration, excitement coming from in the culture, and how do they connect with that?
I think that's a great point. But is it, Rondo? more of the same, but better. Because I think one of the big parts of the incumbent trap is this worked for us before. We discovered Michael Jordan, we nurtured that relationship, we created the shoe, we did all these things, and it created a big bump for us. Let's do more of that, right? We, whatever else Nike may have done, I think the challenge for Elliott Hill coming in, looking back on their successes, is do I copy what worked before? Or to your point, do I tap into these sort of emerging trends, think about it a bit differently, and
Hmm.
wrap and make sure that Nike is sort of first to market in its engagement of that convergence of maybe AI plus these evolving cultural trends, et cetera. And Nike's
Right.
missed a couple times on some of these things, like Nike got punished a little bit in 2017 for, kind of the take a knee movement, and that
Right.
was, a bit challenging for
Colin
them to.
Kaepernick.
They kind of came off the neutral political fence and sort of went in a particular direction, and they were sort of pulled back into line a little bit on that, and consequently, for a period anyway, Nike felt like it was battling uphill on that. They've also had some challenges in terms of supply chain, particularly with child labor and other things like that in
Yeah.
Asia. So Nike hasn't been squeaky clean. Certainly, they've tried to clean up some of this stuff, but I think the challenge is how do you take that mindset, the spirit of the innovation without copying the innovation itself? You know what I
Right.
mean? Like going back into time and saying, well, can we create the next Nike Plus isn't really the point. The point
Right.
is how are people going to engage differently with the brand, with
Right.
the product, with each other, with the cultural sort of evolution of where we're at and where we're going? All of that stuff has to be kind of put into a crucible. And I think Elliott Hill's going to really have to rediscover, not so much rediscover what we did, but how we thought about what we did
How we
and
thought
how
about it.
we engaged in the market to kind of bring that sort of spirit to life. And that's the magic that I think Nike has to rediscover, not
Yeah, I
so
think
much.
your point about, I think going back to how do customers engage with the brand, with our products, with, the problem that they're trying to solve with our products or our competitors. Like they really need to be at that level and understanding that to say, where's the opportunities for us to help them? Where are the opportunities for us to innovate in a way that delivers more different value to them going forward? That to me is the real opportunity for them.
Right. And I think there's a big question here, which I think firms need to ask from time to time, is just a simple, what business are we in question? Because I think there was a stage where you could argue that Nike was a running shoe business. There's no
Right.
doubt about that, right? And that
Right.
was sort of characterized by the early years. And then you could argue that, for a period of time, Nike was almost a basketball shoe business, in the early years of the Michael Jordan
Michael
experience.
Jordan. Yep.
Yep. And then I think during the Mark Parker years and the Stefan Olander era, that was largely Nike was the co-creation business. It was all about kind of creating these new sources of exciting value for customers and inverting that. We're not so much a running shoe business, we're about the runner, to your earlier
Hmm.
point.
Hmm.
So, now where are we now is we're trying to be all these things and a fashion retailer all at the same time. And it's not really clear to me what Nike is, um, and maybe to a lesser degree what Nike stands for in this new era. So will Elliott go all the way back and declare Nike as a running shoe business, or will it be something else? I
Yeah.
don't know. I think it's interesting, but clearly they're losing ground on running shoes. Fashion retailing has never been more complex and nuanced, really challenging. And there isn't much further to go in basketball. So what is that sort of territory that Nike can occupy to take that next step in terms of not only consolidating and recovering some of that market share, but there's a lot of work to be done on the economics of the business too to bring that into line.
Yeah. And to your point, Nike, I think of it as a sports apparel, but it could be much broader than that. But, if you think of it only as a sneaker business, with some apparel, you only come up with like the usual suspects in terms of competitors and some of the newer challenges. But if you think more broadly, I mean, the athleisure companies like Lululemon and Lululemon, excuse me, and others, they're out there too. They're nibbling at Nike's revenues as well on the apparel
Hmm.
side, the fashion side. So you have to really look at the universe of what Nike offers in the market and where they're really seeing erosion because it's they've gotten so complex over the years. That might be part of the challenge too. Like there's so much complexity there. How do they continue to maintain momentum and when they have all these different competitors nibbling at different niches that they're operating in, you know?
I think there's a great point to be sort of leveled up there, Rondo, is it's an ecosystem, right? And some of the things that Nike seemed to be great at 7, 8 years ago that they've lost the plot a little bit on, open innovation. So partners like Apple that they had before, or
Hmm.
partnerships they had with startups, particularly on the Nike Plus platform back in the day when they were looking for these innovations to bring to mainstream on their platform. I don't see much of that from Nike at the moment, although there is some of it happening, particularly in the AI space. But so there's that piece, and then I don't know. I resist the temptation to put them in a fashion apparel bucket because I think that lens is limiting, and I think that's
Yeah.
sort of the lens that the market gives them. This is my point about, Elliot's challenge is going to be how do I define territory for Nike that's, completely fresh, that sort of preserves the heritage of the last couple of decades, but puts Nike in a position to compete quite differently in this next period. And I don't know
Mhm.
what the answer is, but I do know that the mindset that Nike needs to occupy is almost this hybrid incumbent insurgent mindset where um, Nike really has to fix up some of these core challenges, but find new territory for growth and find a way to sort of stimulate the business and its ecosystem to imagine very differently how value is created.
Right. And I think Elliott Hill is probably focused on, in the short term at least, stopping the bleeding with wholesalers and retailers and making some leadership changes and probably needs a little bit more time to step back and say, so what is the longer term path forward for us as an organization?
Does he have time, Rondo? I mean,
I don't know how much time he has, but I mean, he certainly hasn't. Well, at least I haven't seen it. I should say that I haven't heard what the new strategy is. I do know that they didn't have an analyst investor review meeting as they were supposed to have last month or earlier this month because they want to give the give him a chance to develop the new strategy and the new way forward for the company and not have him be weighed down by some of the mistakes that were made under Donahoe regime.
well, yeah, I think that's right. And but the temptation to go deep in terms of focusing on supply side and inside out challenges, I think will be could swing the pendulum too far in the other direction. We might
Hmm.
see Nike recover its share price for a little while. We might see Nike recover or at least stop the bleeding a little bit in market share, which certainly would be welcome, I'm sure, from Nike investors. But um, is Elliott going to be able to set Nike up for the next stage of growth? I think that to me is the bigger concern. So I think, it's while it's central to the Nike strategy to recover the supply chain challenges, to reinvest in product development, to fix the channel challenges.
To
To me, that
improve employee morale.
feels like blocking and tackling to me,
Yeah,
but
it
how do
is.
you restore Nike to growth? To
Yeah,
me, that's Elliott's big challenge. And I think the theme of this discussion is how does he do that in a way that is completely fresh, different, engages customers in new ways? Because they've come to expect Nike to kind of give me the next. You know what I
right,
mean? Whether
right.
it's tech, whether it's my involvement as a consumer in the brand, whether it's innovation, whatever it is, Nike consumers want that sort of fresh engagement. And I look back and I just feel like I don't see it now. I don't feel like Michael Jordan is fresh, even though, my kids are buying these Air Jordans and, hundreds of dollars, and it's just crazy. But
Right.
they only vaguely know who Michael Jordan is. It's
Right.
sort of, what's the next thing?
But that's what I'm saying, because the coolness comes not these days, not because it's Michael Jordan, but because of their culture. It's the thing that they wear. It's the signal to others in their network that they're cool, that that's really what it is, right? So it's sort of like you have to be in the right shoe to fit in with the right crew. So I think that
Right.
that's what they have to figure out. Is it still the Jordan brand, or is it a totally new brand that they need? And is it a sneaker, or is it something else? I mean, I don't know. I don't have the answer.
Yeah, I think you're on the right track a little bit with the women's basketball,
Hmm.
is finding these alternative, if not alternative, but just to the left or the right of the mainstream. I think the market is shifting now. It is much more ready to see emerging categories of existing popular sports and emerging sports sort of coming on. I think
Yeah.
there's interesting territory there where, I know Nike's working very hard to kind of exploit some of these things in our market here in Australia. Women's soccer, same thing as what you described with basketball. It's much more exciting to watch. It's much
Hmm.
more engaging. It's much more authentic. You know what I mean? It's sort of there's lots of opportunities in these alternative niches, which potentially are pretty exciting. So we'll see. But Elliot, we're here and available to help you
Absolutely.
as you're navigating these challenges. But all we can say is that having that insurgent mindset is going to be absolutely essential for this next phase of Nike, and it's going to be make or break, I think, a little bit because you can only stay on top so long if you're not really ahead of the game on innovation and engagement. Now, Rondo,
Right.
that's probably will do it for Nike, but I think some interesting other news has sort of come along um, related to a couple of our earlier podcasts. I think since we did the Intel NVIDIA podcast, we've got a
We got a
we've got
CEO
Intel
departure
exit from Intel, so
from
we sort
Intel.
of signaled that that was probably going to come, and I think also just in the wake of that podcast, we had Intel being delisted from the Dow, which
Yes.
a big item. So really interesting. Lots happening, I think, on that front as well. So it's really a dynamic, moving feast. This topic.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, that's great, Rondo. That was a good one today. Really interesting to explore Nike and kind of get into the nuts and bolts of these different phases of Nike's development. I'm hoping that they can pivot to rediscover that sort of insurgent DNA, and we'll see. We'll watch it close. We'll really
One
watch it.
one of the things that, as I was preparing for our conversation, I said, the underlying theme for me for Nike has to be bold moves. What are the bold moves that you plan to make to position the company for success over the long term? Because I
Mm.
think the incremental thinking, to your point, the status quo thinking, won't do it. So what are the bold moves and the bets that you're going to make over the next few years? That's what Elliott Hill needs to focus on.
I couldn't agree more. Let's see what happens, and we'll report back as it evolves. All right.
Absolutely.
Well, that's great and good one today. We'll look forward to seeing you at our next go around. And thanks for joining me today.
Thank you.